Hilchos Shevuos Perek Shlishi, the laws of oaths, chapter 3. In chapter 1 of these laws, the Rambam told us that all oaths can be categorized into one of four categories. Shevuos Bitoy, the oath of expression, that's the standard oath. Shevuos Shav, the useless oath. Shevuos HaPikadain, the oath over a deposit or a loan. And Shevuos HaEdos, the oath about testimony. From chapter 4 and on, we're going to be exploring these oaths in great detail. Chapters 2 and 3 are dedicated to more general themes that encompass all types of oaths. So for example, in chapter 2, yesterday we were talking about how to formulate an oath properly, how to structure the sentence. And today, the Rambam is going to discuss some general oath categories, like an oath under duress, an oath of exaggeration, an oath with a mistaken mindset, that don't even go into the list of a proper oath. From chapter 4, we're going to be discussing the laws that are relevant to proper Shevuos. But the oaths that we're going to discuss today, the circumstances surrounding them make it so that according to halacha, they're not even considered to be a valid oath. And so in a way, it's like an introductory chapter. Before we get to the details, let me tell you what's not on the list. That's the topics we're discussing today. Says the Rambam halacha aleph kol hanishba shvua me'arba min shvuos elu ba'inus. Anybody who swears, takes an oath of any of these four types of oath which we discussed, under duress, harei ze patur miklum. He's exempt from anything. You violate the oath, it's not a problem, because the whole oath was made in an improper state. What does it mean to make an oath under duress? Says the Rambam, the echad hanishba mitchilase ba'inus. This applies whether the person made the oath from the outset in a state of duress, in circumstances beyond his control. Kemoisha be'arnu, as we already explained, an example of this type of oath. We can assume that Rambam is referring to chapter 1, where he was talking about the oath of the deposit and the oath of testimony, that if somebody takes such an oath and he's unaware that actually the deposit was made or the testimony is, he knows the testimony, in other words, he was genuinely, had a memory lapse at the time. Then later on, when he discovers that indeed the deposit was made or he knows the testimony, the Rambam actually used the word, hariza onus. He is under duress. It's considered that you made that oath in an improper state of mind. So that would be somebody who makes the oath from the outset in a circumstance beyond his control. Or another category of an oath under duress would be shenishba v'nenas v'lehi nichu l'kayim shevuosai. He made a proper oath, then he was subject to a circumstance beyond his control which didn't allow him to fulfill his oath. Or a terrorist, a man of force, made you take an oath. You can take a false oath. That's not considered to be a proper oath. Therefore, Therefore, says the Rambam, it's permissible to take an initially false oath to a robber or to a potential murderer or even to a tax collector. Now don't get so excited. We're not talking about the IRS necessarily. Says the Rambam, which tax people are we talking about that you can make a false oath to them? A tax collector who stands up on his own. Didn't ask anybody's permission. He takes money without the permission of the king of the local region. Or he's taking with the authority of the king, but he adds on his own volition whatever he wants. He adds to the set amount. Hilchos will be more explained in the laws of robbery, in the Rambam's 10th book. It was very customary in the Talmudic times that the Roman governments, whoever it was, would sell the rights to collect taxes to a certain individual or a certain organization, and then they could do whatever they wanted, literally tax whoever they pleased, as they pleased, and it became very problematic for the Jewish people. So this is where the sages said that if they're adding, they're going crazy about how much taxes they're collecting, or they're not even doing it with the authority of the local king, then you can do a false oath to them. But of course, the implication is that if it was set up by just law, a legal system was put in place, and part of it was tax collection, then of course you cannot go around swearing falsely. So I just put up a nice little IRS joke just because everybody suffers from them. And you hear the IRS banging on the guy's door. He says, give me 30% of your income. Why? So I can save you from what? From what I'm going to do if you don't give me 30% of your income. Verstehst? This is the wonderful job of the Internal Revenue Service. At any rate, don't take this as a license. Got to pay your taxes, especially now we're in tax season. File your taxes, do everything right as it's supposed to be. But know that if it's unauthorized, then according to halacha, one is allowed to make an oath to evade these kinds of taxes. However, says the Rambam, the person making the oath under duress must make sure to have in mind explicitly when he makes the oath something which would exempt him. And as the commentaries explain it, we learned yesterday a basic principle, what's called piv v'libay shavin. When you enunciate an oath, you have to mean what you say and say what you mean. So seemingly, when you're making an oath under duress, you anyways don't mean what you say. So you shouldn't have to have any specific intentions. Nevertheless, the Rambam says that you do. And that's because since you're swearing purposely to another entity, to another person, to the robber, to the murderer, to the tax collector, it becomes like the case we discussed at the end of yesterday's chapter, where you make a shvua al das acherim. You make an oath using the awareness of somebody else. In other words, we don't care about your own mind. Now we only care about the mind of the person who's listening to the oath. In this case, the tax collector, the murderer, they want your oath to be true. So therefore, if you want your oath to be considered an oath under duress and not to apply, you have to, in your mind, actively be thinking about something which will make you exempt. And even though typically we say that things that are thought in the heart, einon dvarim, are not considered to be of substance. In this case, since you aren't able to emit the full extent of the intention of your oath with your lips because of the duress, this is one of the few cases the Rabbi said you can rely on the words that you have in your heart. Ketzad, what would be a good example of explicitly thinking of something which would exempt you from your oath? So the Rambam says, let's say the terrorist wants you to give him all your money or whatever, or pay the taxes, let's say, and he says, swear to me that if you're lying, you should be forbidden to eat meat ever. Now, of course, you don't want to pay him the taxes, or you don't want to give him the money. So you say, okay, don't shoot. I swear I won't eat meat. Uvelibai, in your mind, when you say those words, shelo yechal hayoim. Just have in mind to add the word today. I'm not going to eat meat today. Or shelo yechal b'sar chazir. I'm not going to eat pork meat, which anyways is not kosher. Harei zamuta, then it's allowed. Because you made the oath. That's more para. The language can go both ways. And in your head, you were thinking a term of exemption, or a term of limitation, qualification. Just today, just pork. The same thing would apply for anything similar. That's a good way to get away from the oath being considered binding. It's made under duress. Have in mind some kind of limiting qualification. Similarly, oaths of exaggeration and oaths made inadvertently with a mistaken mindset, patur alei, and you're exempt from them. They don't even make the category, they don't even make the list of proper oaths. Shevuos havai ketzad, what counts as an oath of exaggeration? A person saw a huge army or a tall wall. V'nishba, and then he swears, I swear, I saw the army of so-and-so, the king, and they are as numerous as the Jews who left Egypt. Now, how many Jews left Egypt? 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. Count the women and the children, there were like 3 million people. Obviously, this man is exaggerating. I'm telling you, I swear I saw the wall of this city. It's high to the sky. Anything like this. The man never intended to decide, with certainty, this is the amount of people that were in the army, this is how tall the wall was. He simply wanted to communicate the height of the wall or the amount of the army. And so you use an exaggerative term to get across your point, but you never meant to be actually serious and specific with the numbers that you used or the descriptions that you used. And therefore it's called an oath of exaggeration and doesn't count for an oath. Halacha vav, shvua shel shgagos ketzad, what's implied? What's meant by an inadvertent oath? So let's go with a couple of using an example from the different types. If we're talking about an oath of testimony or deposit, so a case of a complete exemption from the oath would be where you were unaware of the deposit or the testimony, which is really part of the first category, oines, where you're exempt completely, as we explained. But let's say we're talking about one of the other two types of oaths, the useless oath, for example, So we would say the example would be where you made an oath not to put on tefillin, but you didn't even know that tefillin was a mitzvah. Had you known tefillin was a mitzvah, you can't make an oath to go against the mitzvah. It's a useless oath. But because you didn't know that tefillin were a mitzvah, so you didn't understand the full power of your oath, so it's considered to be an inadvertent oath and you're not held responsible. If we're talking about a regular standard false oath, about a regular procedure or event, the inadvertent case would be where a person takes an oath that he didn't eat today, and then he remembers that, I did eat. You didn't mean to do it purposely or maliciously, you just didn't remember that you had breakfast. Or you swore that you're not going to eat, and then you forgot your oath and you eat. Or a person makes an oath that his wife is never going to have pleasure from him again because she stole his wallet or hit his child. And it turns out she never hit him, she never stole. Was anything like this. They were mistaken from the beginning. The whole premise was mistaken. And because the premise was mistaken, or the transgression was done in a mistaken way, under a false pretense, under a mistaken pretense, then the oath doesn't count and you're not liable. If so, how would we be able to come up with a case of a mistaken standard oath where you'd be liable to a fluctuating sacrifice? In chapter 1, that Rambam said, when you make a false oath purposely, you get lashes. If you do it inadvertently, you're liable to a sacrifice. Now, if this is what inadvertently means, you were unaware of a certain premise, or you were unaware when you transgressed your oath, we're not holding you liable at all. So when are you liable for a sacrifice? So the Rambam goes through both cases, a case made in the past tense and a case made in the future tense. Lisha avar, if we're talking about the past, it would be a case where you swore you didn't eat breakfast today. And you know that you ate, and you know that what you made the oath is false and it's forbidden. But you didn't know the full extent of the punishment we're going to hold you to, which is a sacrifice. That's an inadvertency where you're going to be liable to a fluctuating sacrifice because of making a standard oath in the past tense. What would be a case, what would be a scenario of inadvertency of a standard oath made in the future tense where you'd be liable to a sacrifice? So here is a little variation. You don't have to forget about sacrifice. Here the Rambam comes up with an actual scenario. A person makes an oath that he's not going to eat wheat bread. 2 hours later you forget and you actually believe that I made an oath to eat wheat bread. So you eat it. You eat it under the impression that you're actually fulfilling an oath, not violating one. This person forgot the nature of the oath. But he knows the object about which the oath was made. So you haven't fully forgotten, you only forgot the nature, not the object. This is a case where you made an inadvertency in a standard oath in the future tense, where you're liable to a sacrifice. But were you to have made an oath not to eat wheat bread, and then you went ahead and ate the wheat bread, not because you thought you made an oath to eat it. You knew you weren't supposed to eat it, but you thought that it's barley bread. You knew you're not going to eat wheat bread. You remembered the object of your oath. You remember the nature of your oath, But you had a mistake in the object of the oath. You thought this was barley. You're considered to be under duress. You're exempt. The nature of your oath was never forgotten. All you lost track of was the object. You thought it was barley, really it was wheat. What if you got both going for you? What if you forgot the nature of the oath and you forgot you had a mix up with the objects? Then for sure you're exempt even from the sacrifice. What would that look like? You made an oath, I'm not going to eat wheat bread. Then you made a mistake in the nature of the oath. You thought that what you had sworn was to actually eat the wheat bread. But then you ate the wheat bread thinking that it's barley bread. So you're like, I know I have an oath to keep track of, to eat the wheat bread, which itself is a mistake, but I'm not doing the oath right now. Now I'm eating barley bread, is what you thought. Turns out it was actually wheat bread, and your oath was not to eat wheat bread. So you lost track of both elements. You now have in your hand a loss of track of the oath and the object. You're like a person under duress, and you're exempt. A person makes a swearing, an oath, over a loaf that he's not going to eat it. Not going to eat the loaf of bread. And then he got in so much pain, and he ate it out of pain. This is called an inadvertency. He thought, Torah laws don't apply once I'm in pain. I know I made the oath, but I regret it, I feel bad, I'm really hungry. Maybe I can, ignore the law for a little bit. You're actually exempt from the sacrifice. This is a very important word in halacha. He never returns from his knowledge. In other words, he never changed his mind. He never disregarded the power of his oath. He knew that his oath binds him to a prohibition. He simply had a mistaken premise. He ate it under the impression, the false impression, the mistaken impression, that this oath can be overridden in the case of pain. But that the oath itself is binding and valid, there was no mistake about that. And since he never lost track of that, so he never went into the category of somebody who's liable to a sacrifice, and therefore he's totally exempt even from the sacrifice.